This is What If I Told You, the event psychology video podcast for event professionals in which Victoria Mady, event consultant and host, talks with the world's top minds in behavioral science, neuroscience, and psychology on how to transform events using insights about human behavior and mind. For more science-based tips, join Event Psychology Club at eventpsychology.gumroad.com. Also, check out Victoria's online course, Event Psychology Lab, at eventpsychology.thinkific.com, which covers key behavioral science concepts and offers research-backed solutions to your event challenges. This course is a unique opportunity to upgrade your industry skills and gain a competitive edge without adding to your already busy schedule. Now, enjoy the conversation.
Hello, I'm Victoria Mady, and this is What If I Told You, the event psychology podcast, where I talk all things event psychology, that is how to apply brain science insights in events. And I'm welcoming today for the second time, Hayley Lewis, business psychologist, coach, university lecturer, for academic making psychology accessible. And I want just to remind you that Hayley's expertise and day-to-day work is in the psychology of work and organizations, and in particular how leadership and management behavior impacts culture and performance. And her doctoral research looked at entrepreneurship and in particular factors that help women establish successful businesses. Thank you for coming back to the show, Hayley.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for asking me back. I'm really honoured. So, and we had so much to talk about last time, didn't we, Victoria?
Exactly.
It was just like we could have just kept going.
Right.
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to catching up and talking more with you.
We were bound to meet for the second time because last time we talked about business psychology field, Kolb's learning cycle, and team performance. Mm-hmm. And I hope that today we are going to discuss some more questions, in particular stress and well-being. Mm-hmm. And I should say this is a huge topic in the events community right now. I mean, it matters for every industry and every field, of course. But I think for the event professionals, it has a lot of importance just because the last 2 years it was just a nightmare, right? Yeah. And we all know that events industry was impacted a lot due to pandemic. And so I think the issues, the topics of stress, well-being, productivity, time management in connection with that as well, and taking care of ourselves, those questions are really important, and I'm just really excited to talk about these topics today. So my first question will be this. Last time when you completed the sentence that I asked you, what if I told you, you mentioned stress, and you said that stress is a made-up concept. And that actually made me thinking a lot, made me curious and made me think a lot. I couldn't stop thinking about that since then. So can you elaborate on that and tell me more? What did you mean? And what do we feel if not stress?
So I'm glad it made you think. I feel like my work here is done. I was being deliberately cheeky. Of course, we all experience stressful events. But the interesting thing for me as a psychologist is how one person responds to stress can be very different to another. And so that's kind of what I mean when I do it. So I'm talking about the stimulus response. So you get some people, so for example, firefighters, you know, you come across firefighters who are completely calm in the face of death, almost, you know, in some instances, going into burning buildings, just really calm, not particularly stressed. And then for others, that would be our worst nightmare. It would be incredibly stressful. And so that's what I mean when I say stress is a made up thing. What I really meant was it's how we choose to respond to something that determines whether we are stressed about it or not. And that's always really interesting to me. And it's something I dig into with many of my coaching clients who are feeling stressed or anxious or overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. Can we learn to react to stress in specific ways that are more productive to us?
I think for some it's easier than others to learn new ways of thinking, to break certain thinking patterns. For others, it might not be that easy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you take into account different personalities, you know, neurodiversity, mental health issues, you know, we have to take that into consideration as well. And, you know, that's why I like to treat everybody as the unique individual they are, and work with the materials that we've got in front of us. And each person is beautifully unique. And so my job is to kind of understand what makes that person tick, help them understand what makes them tick, help them push themselves a little bit more and try and think and react in different ways. And what I always say to clients, particularly coaching clients, I always use the word experiment. Let's experiment between sessions, try stuff out, you know. If you know you've got a stressful event coming up, how would you normally respond to that? Let's try and think about how you could respond differently and experiment, give it a go. If it works, brilliant. If it doesn't, let's learn from that and then tweak it accordingly, like we would with any experiment. And a lot of my clients respond really well to that. I think when we use the terminology of experimentation, it almost takes the pressure off if something doesn't work. We know with scientific experiments, sometimes they don't work, and that's okay. So yeah, it's about understanding what makes each person tick when it comes to responding to stress, and in particular stressful events. What is it that triggers someone in some instances and not others?
That's really interesting. And why do you think people are afraid of experiments? I mean, generally, there is some hesitance, right? Some reluctance to experiment in a way.
I think for many of us, and I can only really talk from a UK context, and in particular the Western world. Although from what I understand in parts of the Eastern world, the education systems are similar, but we're taught from a very young age through our education system. There's a right or wrong way to do things. There's pass or fail. You get an A or not. Or you get all the red pen. You know, I went to school in the 70s and 80s, and so you get the red pen through what you submit. And so, you know, when we're teaching children from a very young age, from the age of 4, 5, about the concept of failing is bad, it makes you less than, it makes you less worthy than, is it any wonder when we kind of fast forward into the workplace, which is where I come in, where we have adults who get really anxious at the thought of trying something out and it not working. And so often what I find I'm having to do is undo a lifetime of that. So I really do think it starts with our education system and how kids are measured and told they measure up or not. And as I say, that goes into the workplace then.
And that my other question is, along with, you know, police officers and military, event professionals are among the 5 most stressful occupations. And burnout is a huge problem as well. And like I said, 2 last years were a nightmare for the industry. What might be some psychology-based considerations that would be helpful to my fellow event planners?
Well, before I share some tips, I think it's important to take a step back first. And this is always my challenge to organisations who want me to work with them. So I get asked a lot, for example, to run sessions on resilience, on giving people resilience tools and stuff like that. And before I even kind of do that, the first thing I say to the client, whether it's the chief exec of an organisation or whoever, is I ask them what else they're doing to deal with organisational issues that are contributing to high levels of stress and burnout. Because no amount of working at an individual level, so working with an individual experiencing burnout, is going to do it. Because burnout is often caused at a systemic level. So burnout is often caused by instances where there's just too much demand and not enough resource to do the work, where there is poor quality line management, where there is insufficient support mechanisms and policies that support employees. And so unless that's all being dealt with, what you're dealing with is the symptom. So the person who's experiencing burnout, you're not dealing with the root cause. And my job as a psychologist, and I would expect this from anybody in my profession, our job is to deal with the root cause. Yes, we can deal with the symptom at an individual level. And of course, you know, people like myself do. But the wider systemic organisational issues must be dealt with as well. Otherwise, you're just going to keep having the same problem again and again and again. And as well as kind of having a personal cost, you know, a physical and mental cost to the individual, there's a financial cost. You know, if you've got increasing numbers of people going off, you know, long-term sick because they've experienced burnout, that's going to hit your bottom line. So it's in your interest to get it sorted as an organisation. So that's my little rant, first of all, because I get really frustrated. And I don't know if you see this, Victoria, or any of your listeners have experienced this. You know, we see all these very well-meaning, we're going to have a well-being event, or we're going to do, you know, well-being week, and that's just not going to do it. However, at an individual level, some of the stuff that can work is helping people put in place boundaries. So having boundaries around when your work phone is on and off, for example, because we know from studies that when we feel we have to be on all the time, that's going to interrupt our sleep pattern. It's going to interrupt our relationships with our loved ones. It's just not a healthy way to be. So things like helping people put in place boundaries around email and phone and stuff like that can be helpful. Encouraging the person to have a conversation with their line manager to talk about this, to see what support their line manager can offer. And obviously that's dependent on having a good relationship with your line manager. And nine times out of 10, most people do. But unfortunately, you know, burnout, when we get to the stage of burnout, it's already too late in that, you know, and there's a way back from that, but it's a long way back. I experienced it myself and became physically and mentally ill. So this was 10 years ago, and it took me about a year to recover. And I needed a lot of help and support from others. So I had counselling, I had a mentor, I worked with my line manager to kind of put in place some boundaries. I did everything from kind of looking at my sleep patterns, because I was feeling so overwhelmed in my job. I was working later and later, but getting up earlier and earlier. And so the window of sleep was getting kind of shorter. And I'm somebody who needs a good 7 hours sleep, but I was surviving on like 4 hours. And so, yeah, so there's a number of, you know, I think there are things you can do to protect yourself. But in terms of overcoming burnout, I go back to my original point. There has to be some stuff that changes. You know, a weekend off, a long weekend off, or a week away on holiday doesn't solve burnout. You're just coming back to the same problems. God, that's a bit gloomy, isn't it?
I love it. I love that you address it on systemic and individual level, and you have message for both leaders and people in general who are employees of the companies. They may take care of themselves on an individual level, but we still need a lot to do, a lot to be done on a system level. Right. And you mentioned mental health, and we actually, I believe we finally got to discuss mental health issues in the events community. But what I see in those discussions kind of concerns me, because it's more like general, vague things. And I have a question: what we as a community, what we can do apart from discussions to help each other to cope and to help each other with those mental health issues.
Yeah. So I think don't underestimate the power of talking. You know, again, as a psychologist, I'm all about talking therapy. Absolutely. And, you know, there's a real power in externalizing. I think the thing about mental health for many decades, if not centuries, has been about shame and people feeling ashamed of having whatever mental health issues. And so to talk about it to kind of externalize how you're feeling is one of the most powerful. You've already taken some power back. There's a real power in that. I think we are starting to see slowly but surely destigmatization, but the stigma is still there around mental health. And so, you know, one of the things I'd like to see more of is more people openly sharing their mental health experiences, particularly older people, men, people at a more senior level, so who are effectively role models for those coming up behind them, you know, because that sends really powerful messages to those who are watching and listening. I think if, for any of your listeners, if you're in a situation where a colleague discloses to you, shares with you a mental health issue, the best thing you can do is just listen. You don't need to have answers for them. Often that's the worst thing we can do. Right. Be well-meaning in giving it, and actually just listening and not proffering advice is a really powerful thing to do. I think for those of your listeners who might be in management positions, who might manage staff, one of the things I say to lots of people managers is know where to signpost people to. Your role as a line manager, you've got to be clear on your own boundaries. You're not a counsellor, unless you are a trained counsellor, but even then, be clear on your boundaries. Know where you can signpost people to. And so in large organisations, and I imagine some of your listeners work in large event organisations, I would hope that an in-house HR team would have resources. You might have what we call an employee assistance programme where you can get free counselling. So I think one of the best things you can do if you're in a management position is get really comfortable about knowing where to signpost people to for additional support or help. If you work in a smaller organisation, so a smaller event organisation, and you don't have the luxury of lots of resources, you don't have a big HR department, then different countries have different charities. So, for example, in the UK, we have the wonderful charity called Mind. And Mind, the Mind website in the UK has loads of resources. So if you're working with somebody with mental health issues, how to help them, things you can do. So, go and seek out some of the well-known charities around mental health in your particular country and see what resources they have on their website. There's some really good stuff out there.
That's a great advice. And coming back to your sketch notes, which I always love, and I think one of those that you shared lately was about PERMA model.
Yeah.
And can we talk about that? What are the components? And I just want to mention that it's specifically related to our conversation today. But can you tell more about that?
Yeah, so PERMA was developed by Professor Martin Seligman. So some of you might have heard of Martin Seligman. He is often held up as the originator of what we call positive psychology. And PERMA is work that he did along with his colleagues. I think the powerful thing about PERMA as a framework is it's an evidence-based framework. It's not just some trite little thing that somebody's come up with. It's an evidence-based framework developed by a group of expert psychologists who've tested it on different populations. And the thing that I love about it, and I don't know if you find this, Victoria, is the different elements, particularly the M about meaning and the R about relationships, reminds us that we're more than our jobs and there's life outside work. And I think that's really important.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. No, I love all those components. Can we go through them?
Yeah,
and
of course.
Can you share what you think is the most probably? I always ask this question, but I'm not sure if you feel, this way, but is there any of those 5 that is the most important one?
You know what I'm going to say?
The one that we can start with,
It depends. It depends on the person. Yeah. It depends on the person. It depends on the context. So even for the same person, in one instance, there might be an element of the framework that has more resonance than the others. And then, 6 months later, there could be other elements that hold more resonance. I mean, the main thing is that you work on them all equally. That's the whole point, is you're meant to, if you treat them like pillars, and we should be looking after each of them every day. Actually, that's what helps us protect and maintain our well-being.
Right. Okay. Can you go through them and share what you think about those?
So the P stands for positive emotions. So on the sketch note that you're talking about, Victoria, and I'm assuming that you'll share it in the show notes. So the P stands for, absolutely. The P stands for positive emotions. So underneath each of the kind of the letters of the acronym, I've given ideas for how people can boost this particular element. And so, so positive emotions is the P. And so, for example, one of the ideas I suggested is gratitude practice. So there's been, there's not a huge amount of research, but there's increasing research into the impact of practicing gratitude on our health and well-being, but also on how it can impact those around us as well. And so, that might be something that some of your listeners want to try out. Find one good thing that you're happy for, grateful for at the end of each day, and it doesn't need to be huge stuff. Sometimes there's a beauty in the small things. For me, today, it was the perfect hot espresso, because I'm quite pernickety about heat of my coffee, and the heat was perfect. Not too hot that I couldn't drink it, but hot enough that I could enjoy it. And that made me really happy and grateful, and that I can afford nice coffee, So there can be, it's not always about finding the big things to be positive about. There can be a real beauty in just the small moments. And sometimes we ignore the small moments.
I feel like oftentimes we don't notice small things.
Yeah.
We expect that we should be happy when there is something big going on. Yeah. But in fact, it's small things that matter a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So that's P, and there's other ideas I've put on the sketch note. So if you listen to this show, you'll be able to access that. The E is for engagement. So that's about connecting with what you're doing. So, for example, at work, that could be doing something within your work that you get really absorbed in. So, for example, for me, sketch notes, I find really absorbed. I love doing them. I get really absorbed in them. I find it almost meditative. I'm learning stuff. I'm helping other people learn stuff, and I really engage with it. So, there's something about thinking about what your strengths are, for example, and how you can leverage those strengths in your work. Because when we leverage our strengths, we're much more likely to connect with the work and get absorbed and engage in it. So engagement is the E. R, which is one of my favourites, is relationships. So how you are connecting with others, how you are, communities that you're part of, how you are getting a sense of belonging at work, for example. Do you feel connected and belonging with your colleagues? That's really important. And even if you've only got a deep connection with one colleague, that's brilliant. And there's something about how you can be grateful for that as well, but also what you're contributing. It's not just about taking from the relationships. It's also about thinking about what you're giving to others. And we know that, again, there's research that suggests that when we are kind and give to others, it makes us feel good. And when we feel good, we're more likely to do good work, do better work, be better family members. And so how can you give a little more? How can you help someone else? Asking ourselves that each day can help us just connect a bit deeper. M is for meaning. So how we get meaning from what we're doing. So, your listeners most of them will be in the event industry. I imagine you'll probably get some additional listeners who are curious, but most of your listeners will be in the event industry. Why do you do what you do? What do you love about it? What do you contribute to it? What meaning do you get from it? So, for example, if you're helping design and run and create an event that's for the charity sector, does that help you realize that you're helping in some way do social good? That actually what you're doing is having a profound effect, even if you don't necessarily see the impact on others. So there's something about thinking about the impact that we have through our work and the meaning that we get, the connection that we get from our work. And there's a reason more often than not that people go into certain professions. But the older we get, sometimes we forget what drew us to this, and it can be helpful just to sit and think, what drew me to this in the first place, and how can I kind of reconnect with that? And then the A is about achievement. Log those achievements, again, no matter how small. I've been doing an experiment with a couple of teams in different organisations. So one is an NHS trust in the UK, and one is a local authority in the UK, so a city council. They've been trying out, so these teams have been trying out different things that can help them boost their mood, their well-being. And one of the things that I've been getting them to do is 3 things at the end of each day. So do your to-do list for the next day at the end of the day before you finish work. The second is note down 1 to 3 things that you achieved. Doesn't matter how small. It could be anything from, I sent that email to that person I was a bit nervous about. That's an achievement. And the third is thank one person. And so those three things tap into what the science tells us can make us feel good about ourselves and boost our well-being. And so why don't you try that yourself? So those who are listening, you could do one of those three things, or you could do all three of them, and do it consistently every day over the course of a month, and just see how you feel about yourself and your work and your mood at the end of that month.
This is a terrific idea. I love it. To-do list, achievements list, and gratitude.
And thank one person.
List, right?
Yeah. The really interesting thing about and it can have a ripple effect across your wider organisation and beyond. So an unintended effect. So with one of these organisations that I've been working with, the team in question, so they've been thanking one person, and more often than not, they've been thanking somebody outside their team. And it's been happening so often now that other teams in the organisation are like, this is a bit weird, but also quite nice. And so they're starting to do it as well, to the point where it's got all the way to the chief executive, who's like, what's all this about? What's going on? So it's kind of had this ripple effect of people just thanking each other for specific things that they've done. So it's not just saying thank you for the sake of it. Having that ripple effect is incredible. So so try it out. You might be surprised at the ripple effect in your own organisation.
Absolutely. No, I love it. And I think thanking for specific things, that's a really interesting point, because it's not just saying thank you generally, because it can be about like some general things, and it doesn't feel the same way as I'm thanked for the specific thing I did for that person.
Absolutely.
Right?
Each of us as humans want to be seen. We want to be seen in some way. And in a work context, often the way we're seen is for the things that we've done. And so thanking somebody for a specific thing that they've done is one of the most powerful things that we can do as a colleague. Because the danger is when we just say thank you and we throw thank yous out, but without any basis, it becomes meaningless. And so, just thanking someone who, thank you for making me a cup of tea because you thought that I was really stressed and busy. I really appreciate that. Doesn't always have to be for the big things.
Yeah, the power of small things.
Absolutely. That should be the title of this episode, Victoria.
Well, let's make it the title, but I will still ask you that question. All right. So my next question is about employees' well-being. So I think you said that team members or employees' well-being is one of the attributes of high-performing teams. What are the other attributes? So
this is what I'm running a course on this week. It's one of my most popular courses, is how to build a high performing team. And this is one of the things that I talk about, is what are the characteristics. So research into teams and team behaviour and kind of high performance teams really only started probably since about the 50s. So we've got about 7 decades of research. And when you kind of summarise those thousands of studies, the same things can come up time and time again. So the kind of things we look for in high performance teams are all the team members having a high level of competence and confidence. So feeling competent and confident in themselves, but also having confidence in their colleagues' competence. So they've got faith in each other. And so one of the questions that I ask kind of leaders of teams is, what are you doing to support and build and nurture each of your team members' confidence? what development programs do you have in place that support developing their skills and their knowledge and experience. The other characteristic is really clear standards of excellence. So not shying away from wanting to achieve excellence. So really clear standards that are regularly communicated and talked about and understood by team members. I was working with a client yesterday, somebody that I'm coaching, and they've got standards of excellence in their business plan. And when I asked if I was to speak to each of your team members, would they know what those standards are? Well, it's in the business plan. And so I was a little bit challenging, and I said, that's not what I asked. How many of your team members will have read your business plan? They should have, but that doesn't mean they will have. And so do you talk about this stuff? Is there a visual that you can put up? Are you talking about this stuff all the time? Because we know that what a leader talks about and pays attention to creates the culture of the team and the organisation. And so just to say, well, yeah, they're in a business plan, that says to me they're laying dormant, and I would guess that the team members wouldn't know what they are. And so, yeah, it's not enough to have those standards. You've got to be talking about this stuff regularly. You've got to be living and breathing this stuff and role modelling their importance. Psychological safety, you knew I was going to talk about this. So the highest performing teams have exceptional levels of psychological safety, which then enables them to have tough conversations with each other. You know, a high performance team isn't a Disney film. It isn't everybody like hugging each other and it's all soft and fluffy and rainbows. It's also about how you deal with conflict and the tough stuff. And you don't avoid that, but you have those tough conversations in a respectful way, from a place of compassion and non-judgment. And actually your aim is to solve the problem together, not take personal pot shots at each other. High levels of trust, which goes hand in hand with psychological safety. You can't hope to be a high performance team if you don't have a foundation of trust. I always talk about people feeling like they've got each other's backs. You want to know that when push comes to shove, when you're up against it, particularly in really tough situations, there might be a crisis, or an emergency. So, for example, you might have a keynote speaker who pulls out at the last minute because they've experienced a bereavement, or, I know that's a nightmare for an event professional. And so you want to know that you're not alone in dealing with that, and that the rest of your team has your back and is going to help you without you needing to ask them. And that comes from a place of trust. And so trust is often the kind of the big and the first thing that I help teams with, because that takes hard work. And then, I mean, there's a few more things, but the final thing is high levels of familiarity. The more people know each other, the more likely they are to trust each other, the more likely they are to help each other out. And so what I say to those who lead teams is, have you mapped out a program of activity around team building and team development, or are you doing it randomly as you go along? You need to think about it carefully and strategically. So you might have full day team building events. You might have an hour where you're focusing on a specific topic. You might have informal stuff, formal stuff, stuff during the day, stuff in the evening, stuff at lunchtime. So you've got variety that takes into account people's different needs, working patterns, but you can't leave this stuff to chance. So when I led teams, I always made sure at the start of each year, I mapped out a program for the 12 months. What was going to happen each month, each quarter? What were the kind of themes that we'd cover as part of our team development and team building? That's why I had a high performance team.
That's great. And I know that we are almost running out of time, but I have to ask this question. I think this one that you mentioned in the very beginning of our first conversation, that was about self-efficacy. And in particular, I think you mentioned that it works differently for women than men. And I wanted to ask you to share more about this theory of self-efficacy, and also what can we do to make women feel more confident, more more confident is my only word probably, because I think women, and we all know that women struggle with confidence more than men, and they are more shy when they network or when they are talking about their achievements and so on. So how can we help women, and how it relates to the theory of self-efficacy? Can you tell more about that?
So self-efficacy, just as a reminder for those who might not have listened to the previous episode, is it's from the work of the psychologist Albert Bandura, and in a nutshell, self-efficacy is the belief that you can successfully do a specific thing in order to achieve a successful outcome. And we can boost our self-efficacy in a number of ways. So there are a number of kind of evidence-based ways that as human beings we can boost our self-efficacy. So, for example, one is a really popular technique to boost that self-belief and subsequently confidence is visualization. So this is something that we often see athletes do at the Olympics. They visualize themselves winning the race. And they do that in the months and years running up to that final race. They have seen themselves time and time again. They've played it through in their mind. Everything from visualizing putting on their clothes, visualizing walking up and getting ready, stretching, visualizing kind of bending down, getting ready for the starter gun, visualizing hearing. They visualize everything. And so this is something that I talk to quite a few of my female clients about how you can visualize. If you've got, for example, so I've got one client I'm working with, they've stepped up into a really big role. So they're at board level now. And they're about to give their first board presentation to people who are now their peers, and they're very nervous, understandably. And so we've been doing a lot of visualization, visualizing giving a great presentation. What would that look like? What will you be wearing? How will the room be set up? Because they are going to do it in person. So actually playing it through in your mind almost can take the fear out of the situation, and B, it's almost like you've lived and breathed it in your mind so much it becomes a reality. So visualization is a really powerful technique. A second tactic that can work to boost your self-efficacy, your self-belief, is role models. That's why role models are so powerful. So are there other women around you or that you know of in your field, so in the professional field of event management, who have achieved what you'd like to achieve, who've done or are doing what you'd like to do? Can you reach out to them? Can you learn about them? Is there somebody who could introduce you to them and you could have a brief conversation with them just to learn a little bit more? Role models are really powerful. And so the question that I'd ask your listeners are, who are the role models in your industry? Who are the role models for you personally, and what can you learn from them? And then a third and final tactic, you use the word achievements, Victoria, is to note down your achievements, because the whole thing about self-belief is knowing you've done it before, or you've done something like it before. There's a real power in saying to yourself, do you know what, I've done that before, and if I've done it before, I can do it again. That's one of the things that came out of my doctoral research. It was one of the things that many of the women that I interviewed said. You know, I've done this thing before, I can do it. I've written strategy documents, I can do it again. I've written a proposal for a tough client when I worked in-house, I can do it again. So that can be a really powerful thing to say to yourself. So noting down your achievements, the difficult things you've done, can be really powerful. So yeah, that's just a few things that can help boost our self-belief and subsequently our confidence in ourselves.
These are great suggestions. Thank you. All right. And my two final questions. What resources would you recommend to get or to read or to get familiar with to my listeners on the topics of resilience, coping with stress, and well-being?
Yeah. So my very good friend Gemma has just released her book, Mindset Matters. So Gemma Lee Roberts has just released her book, Mindset Matters. It's actually based on her brilliant newsletter on LinkedIn. So she's got almost 600,000 subscribers on LinkedIn. She shares really practical advice on a whole host of issues to do with resilience in particular. That's her area of expertise. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so the new book, Mindset Matters by Gemma Lee Roberts, and sign up for her newsletter on LinkedIn. Another book that I often recommend to clients is a book called Resilience by Jane Clark and Dr. John Nicholson, which is an evidence-based book. It's not a dry book, but it's filled with evidence-based tools and techniques that have worked for many other people in navigating the ups and downs of working life and just life in general. And that's ultimately what we're talking about today. And ultimately that's my job as a psychologist in the workplace, is helping people navigate when obstacles pop up and when the tough stuff happens. And so, yeah, so that's a book that I recommend. Those are two that I would definitely recommend. And as I said earlier, you know, have a look at any big charities or even smaller charities in your particular country, province, who specialise in mental health. As I say, in the UK, so for any UK listeners, you might be familiar with Mind. They have excellent resources on their website. And obviously you can access that website from anywhere in the world. So if you can't find anything in your local area, go and have a look at the Mind UK website. It's filled with brilliant resources around mental health.
That's brilliant. And the final question. So can you complete the sentence? What if I told you, with one takeaway from our conversation?
What if I told you you have choices? You can choose how you respond to any situation, and you have more power than you probably realise.
Fantastic. I love it. And it's, again, very thought-provoking.
Watch out for part 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Hayley, and for sharing all this knowledge with us. I, again, highly recommend you all guys to go check out Hayley's website and connect with her on LinkedIn and Twitter. And links will be provided in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in to What If I Told You, the Advanced Psychology podcast. For more brain science insights and for this episode recap, I invite you to join the Advanced Psychology Club. And remember, experiences take place in people's minds. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.